Hey guys, welcome back to Way of the Wrench. I've got an awesome episode for you. Today we're going to start actually cutting wood and making our control panel. And that's going to start right now. Alrighty guys, it's going to be pretty awkward to cut wood for our control panel in the auto shop, so we got to get out of here and get over to the wood shop. Let's go. All right, now we're in the wood shop here. I've got to break stock on that big 4 foot by 8 foot piece of 5/8 thick MDF. So we're going to break it down on the panel saw, and then once it's in smaller sections, we use a table saw to get them into the strips, and use some other saws like a bandsaw to get it all cut up for you guys. Now I'm going to try something different a little bit. I'm going to try to do a little bit of voiceovers and get some really nice close shots so you guys can actually see what I'm doing on the machines. And so let's get going.
Alright, so this is a 4 foot by 8 foot sheet of 5/8 thick MDF, and if you've ever used this stuff before, you will know it is heavy as hell. So what I'm doing is just cutting it up into some more manageable pieces so that we can do it on the table saw next. Notice I've got a respirator on, not a bad idea because this MDF is basically sawdust and glue, and you're going to be breathing all that in, so not a bad idea. Get yourself a respirator. Alright, so here I am taking a nice straight cut along the fence on the table saw, so I've got a nice cleaned up edge. Now I'm setting the width for the top control panel width. Make sure you put the nice clean cut against the fence. And there is the finished width on the top control panel. Now I'm setting up the width for 1 inch shorter for the bottom control panel. Once again, make sure you got your nice cleaned edge against the fence. And there's the finished bottom control panel. Okay, right here I'm just taking another final cut. I think I was knocking off a bit of the banged up edge on the MDF. And now I'm setting up for the width of the side pieces of the control panel. Not a bad idea when you're doing these cuts to make sure you got someone to help catch the wood at the end. So thanks, Miss Brandon, for that. And then we're setting up for the last little cut, which is the front 3 pieces on the control panel. Alright, so now we're off to the panel saw. I always like to take a quick little skim and make sure that I've got a great 90-degree end on it. And I'm flipping it over and measuring from the good side. And this would be the bottom or the top of the control panel. So line it up, make a nice straight cut. So there's the finished rough dimensions for the top control panel. Now we're going to repeat for the bottom. So I'll take another skim cut off the end. Now you get a nice straight corner. Make your mark. There you go, finished bottom control panel. Now we're basically just going to repeat the process for the sides, or this is probably the back actually. Now there's the finished back. Once again, take a skim. So that was the first, like the left side, and this can be the right side of the control panel. And this will be for the front 3 sections on the control panel. So I'll clean up the end, make a nice square cut. So that'll be for the left or right side of the front. And then this will be the opposite side. And then with the last piece, we need to do the 12-inch centerpiece on the front. Alright, this piece is getting skinny down because this is the very front centerpiece, which is a little bit thinner because the other sides have the angle to get cut off. Alright, now I didn't show it because I needed my phone for the digital angle finder to set my angle of the table saw. But what I'm doing here is I've got a slight angle on the table saw, and I'm just creeping up so that I don't lose any width overall, but I still get that angled cut. And so here I've slowed it down so you guys can see what I'm talking about. I left just a bare witness so you can see the end. So I haven't changed the width, but I have that angle now. Alright, this is the front of the control panel, and it has that 10-degree angle as well. And once again, I don't want to change the width, I just want to put on that angle. So I usually take a pencil and write on the edge to see where I've cut and where I haven't cut. So I sneak up on it. That way I just take barely enough and I don't cut it too short. And there we go. You can barely see the witness on the edge there. Alright, these are the side pieces, and so basically I'm laying out from the back to the front and giving that angle line that I need to cut. So there's the one side, there's the front, line it up with the back, make a nice line. Alright, here I am at the bandsaw, and I've really carefully marked out which side's my cut side, and I'm going very slow. This is 600%, so it looks fast, but this thing cuts like butter, so I've gone really slow, so I stay on my line, so I've got very little to sand. So there's one side, and here is the second side. Watch your fingers. Get them out of the way there. Alright, I'm a bit of a perfectionist, and I did try my hardest to get it as close as possible on the bandsaw, but there's some little bits off. So I'm using the disc sander to basically clean to my line, make sure there's no extras. Now the cutting's done, we're back in the classroom, and I've taken our paper template of what we wanted to make from our last episode, and I've lined it up exactly perfectly, front to back, left and right. And now I'm transferring the outer profile, so I have something to cut, and transferring any of the marks that I need so that I can do a good job. I also transferred the center line from the front to the back, so that when I take the template off, I can use a square and make a nice straight center line for me for laying out for my buttons and joysticks later. Alright, we're on to the bottom piece, and I'm getting a center line for the piece so that I can accurately line up the center line of the template. And now I'm just going around and ticking off or marking where all of the exact spots are for all of the left and front side pieces. I'm marking off the front location, so the front 12 inches. And then I can use the marks to lay out the angles on the front, left and right. With that done, use the new tick marks to lay out the left angle to the back. And the same thing on the right. And then I like to kind of scratch around on the pieces I'm cutting off. Kind of force a habit, that way I don't cut off the wrong stuff. So now what I'm doing is I'm very accurately laying out where the front pieces are going to be. So that way when I go to glue and nail in the battens, I will have an exact area for where the pieces of the control panel will be screwed in. So once again, take your time, be accurate. Remember, your control panel is only going to look as good as your layout. If your layout looks crappy, your finished product's going to look crappy too. Alright, now that I have all those lines laid out accurately, I can actually start putting on the actual pieces and lining them up and just double checking and seeing what it looks like. So I've got the back and the front left on. The front left at an angle. I'm just using those lines where I'm going to put the battens to lay everything out. Just double checking all of my dimensions. And the final front right piece that's at an angle. Just make sure everything sits flush, and if there's any issues we can start lining things up. And then this is just the top control panel that's out of paper, so just to check some stuff, make sure the overhang's okay, check everything out. And then right here I'm just noticed there's an angle that needs to be sanded on the back. Now I'm laying out the center line for the back piece. So one mark at the top, right in the center, one for the bottom, and then just get a straight edge and make sure I got a nice straight center line. And then off of that center line, I want to figure out the center and figure out roughly where my power outlet is going to go with my fuse and the HDMI pass-through socket. So I'm just kind of visually looking where it goes. I think I went about 2 inches from center on both sides, so marking that out. Just kind of giving an idea of where the center line for that hole is going to be. And then I'm just measuring the width and the height of that electrical outlet so I can lay it out.
Alright, so right here, this is the back of the control panel, and so this is going to be a little square hole we're going to cut out, so probably just drill the corners out with a drill bit, get in there with a jigsaw and take that out, and maybe file the corners in, and that will be for our power outlet. And then this one here is going to be an 1.1/16 diameter hole for our HDMI cable that we're going to pass through, and then the nut goes on the back side. So these are the only two things that come out the back. Power for everything else inside the control panel, and HDMI for video and audio.
Alright, so what I'm trying to do now is just visually figure out what looks good for where to put the left and right pass-through USB sockets. So once I had an idea where it was going to go, basically just mark that out, make a nice straight line, center it between the gaps. And then that's where the 1 1/8 hole is going to go for the left and right for the pass-through sockets. So there's the pass-through socket for the USB. Alright, back to the bandsaw, and this is the top control panel piece. Once again, this is 600% speed increased, so take your time. This machine cuts like butter, so it was quite slow actually when I did this. Just follow your lines, and if anything, don't cut your lines off. That way you can always sand to it. So stay away from the line if you need to and sand up to it. So I know I'm going to get lots of comments about, oh, I thought this was a DIY project, or it must be nice to have all these nice shop tools. There's no way I can do this cabinet, I guess. But all of these cuts that I've shown you so far, even though I'm using all these panel saws and table saws and band saws, literally can all be done with a $50 jigsaw. So don't get too disheartened. Remember, you can do this. It just requires a little bit more sanding. Okay, and then here is the bottom control panel. Once again, take your time. If you don't cut the line off, you can always sand down to it. And if you're doing this at home, basically just get some sanding blocks and start with a coarse grit to make the sanding go quick. Make sure you got a dust mask on because this stuff's pretty nasty. And then go down to a finer grit, and you can go right up to your line and smooth it all out and make it look pretty. But I do have all these nice machines, so I'm back to the disc sander, and instead of doing it by hand, why not use the machines if I've got them? So the lines are a little bit choppy, but I could see them still, so I'm just using the disc sander to clean it up. And look at that mustache fight going on. Wow. There's the other side. Alright, now that the bottom control panel is done, switch up to the top. Once again, take all those rough, jagged edges and smooth them down to our lines. Take your time on the corners, because on this disc sander it hogs material off pretty quick, so I took my time and made sure I didn't go past my lines on my curves. Sides are a little more forgiving, but this machine really likes to hog off the MDF, so just take your time, and if you use sanding blocks at home, you'll be totally fine. Just don't go past your lines. Alright, on to the glue blocks or battens. So I could have bought some cleaned up material, but I decided to just save some money and get a big chunk of 2x4 and just make it myself. So cut them to length on the radial arm saw, and now it's on to the jointer. So I'm making one really nice flat edge. I like to take pencil and put it on the surface there. That way I know when that surface is cleaned up. So there's the biggest, flattest edge done. There I am marking the side, making sure it's pushed against the fence so I get a nice square 90-degree cut. And you just keep going until the pencil marks are gone and you got a nice 2 square 90-degree edges. And here off to the planer. I want to get the other side down, and I decided to make my glue blocks or battens 1 inch thick. So I'm using a planer to quickly hog that off and get down to 1 inch. Once again, if you don't have all these machines, you can just go buy like 1 inch by 1 inch material already pre-made. So now that I've got that flattened down to 1 inch, I'm just using the table saw to get it exactly 1 inch by 1 inch. And then I'm just trying to make as many lengths of the 1 inch by 1 inch so I can get as many battens out of that one strip as I can. And even though I got close to 1 inch in the planer, I just decided to make it a little bigger and then just make it exactly 1 inch on the table saw. Alright, now that I got the battens to 1 by 1 inch, now we're just going to make it the different lengths to help support the back, the sides, and the different front pieces. So I'm just going to use a radial arm saw to cut those up.
Alrighty guys, so we've cut up our battens or our glue blocks, and so you can see that when we're going to put this down, we'll basically put some glue along this edge right here. Put it down like that, line it up with our line that we've already got in here to save space for our MDF, nice and accurate. Brad nail, put it down in there, and then that way when we put in our front pieces, we can screw into that and have something really strong and secure. So there's all our battens ready to go for this beast. Exciting, it's getting going further and further.
Alright, jumping back to our side panels, just getting a center punch and a hammer and making a nice sharp little divot for the Forstner bit to be able to center on, and that way we get that exactly where we want it. Alright, use your center punch mark and locate the center of your Forstner bit. Make sure you clamp your wood down so it doesn't tear it out of your hand, and take your time going through so you don't have any tear out. I noticed that the MDF is pretty good that way. It doesn't tear out as long as you take it easy. If you're doing plywood, I would highly recommend drilling a small little hole first, then drilling the Forstner bit halfway through, and then flip it over to finish it off. That way you don't get any tear out. Alright, for your viewing pleasure, the Spindle Sander. Now, the reason why I'm even having to use this is because I didn't have the actual proper size for the Forstner bit. I only had 1 1/8 Forstner bit, and I needed it just a touch over that. So onto the Spindle Sander, just to basically sand this out a little bit until it fits through pass-through socket. So on and off, putting that pass-through socket, making sure it goes in flush. And if it doesn't, it goes back on. And check this out, round 2 for the mustache fight. Oh, that mustache is winning. Look at that, you see that hit? Oh, here we go. Me versus the mustache again. There's one side, pass-through socket fits nice and flush, and I will save you from watching the rest of the second one, but there's the second one started. Alright, this is the back piece. So what we're doing is I'm center punching the holes for the HDMI output and the electrical output. There's the hole for the USB. Just just using a 1 1/8 and drilling the corners out so I can get a jigsaw or a scroll saw to hack out the hole for that electrical outlet. Alright, once again I don't have the proper Forstner bit for the HDMI output on the back, so I'm just using the Spindle Sander to open it up here. So now that I've got those 4 holes, scroll saw to cut out that pocket for the electrical outlet. I'm using a scroll saw. You can use a jigsaw. You could even just hack it to pieces with a drill bit and make a whole bunch of holes and then file it if you need it to be. But once again, I got these nice tools, so why not use them?
Alright, so what I've got here is my left and right side panels for the control panel, and I have decided that I want to put some cooling into here. So I went and got some 80mm computer case fans, and so I need a 3-inch hole for this so that the air can get through. And I have gone a little bit forward and I've done some Google SketchUp's drawings to figure out where I'm going to have the end of the cabinet coming out. So I'm basically using this and centering it out. 1.25 inches there, 1.25 inches there, 1.25 inches from that spot there. It's a little bit bigger there, but I do need it centered because there is a 1-inch glue batten in here that I need to avoid. So
now I'm using a massive 3-inch Forstner bit. You could also use a 3-inch hole saw, or once again you could just drill a bunch of holes and file it out. Either way, we're just making a nice pretty 3-inch hole for those computer case fans. Alright, this is the second side, and for the love of God, please don't go this fast. This is 1,000% increased. Alright, this is me setting up my practice piece for the router for the TV. Take your time with this. It's something nice and accurate like a digital helper, and measure top to the bottom. Make sure it's just centered. If it's not, make a microscopic adjustment on the router and different spot until you're exactly centered, because this is a scrap piece of wood. Alright, now that I got that slitting saw set up in the router exactly right in the center of this 5/8 MDF, now this is the bottom piece. I'm just going to accurately go around and do one side at a time. So it's good. Alright, onto the top control panel piece, much the same, just make sure it's clamped nice and steady, and I make sure to go around the corner a little bit just to make sure that I don't leave it a little bit shallow for the T-root molding in the corners. Alright, onto the front of the side pieces. It's the only side pieces that you're going to see, so we just did the front. Alright, now that that's all done, we are putting in the battens. So I'm using the pencil layout lines for where those battens are supposed to go, or where the 5/8 thick MDF pieces are going to go. And so I'm using some regular wood glue, putting a little bit down one side, and I'm using a piece of 5/8 to really make sure I'm lined up, and then I just brad nail one end and then the other end, And then once it's all in the right spot, then I put enough, space them out so I've got some room for screws. And then just go around the perimeter. Don't use too much glue. You'd be surprised how much you'll end up getting squished out when you do this. And when you're using a brad nailer, you should probably get a scrap piece of wood and test to see how far your nails penetrate. If it's set too hard, you'll have all these nails punching through the bottom. So get a scrap piece and try it out. Now you're also going to want to take a piece of paper towel and basically wipe up the excess glue as it's wet. If you wait till it's dry, there's quite a pain in the butt of chipping off with a chisel. Get off with the paper towel before it gets hard. Alright, when you're setting up the strength of your brad nailer to make sure the nails don't go through the material, try to use the same amount of pressure, because I noticed in a couple spots I pushed harder down on the wood and I ended up getting 2 or 3 spots that just poked through. All I ended up doing is sanding them down, so it wasn't too big of a deal though. Alright, time to put in the side panels. Now what I'm doing is I'm making a where those glue battens are, so I make sure that I drill in the center. And also marking where the brad nails are so that I don't run a screw right into where the brad nail is. And center punch drill goes exactly where I want it. And then I'm super picky, so I set this up in a dry fit, tested right from left and right to make sure they were exactly centered. And then super paranoid, I basically realized that one of the panels was not sitting in square because of the glue that had dried in the corner. So really quickly I went around with a chisel, glue sticking out from the wood. And then once I had done all that, I dried and I realized that the sharp edge of the MDF was still kind of sitting. So what I did is I quickly sanded off the edge so it for sure sat in there nice and 90 degrees. And just went around and did all of them. Alright, so now that I'm happy with everything sitting 90 degrees and centered, I am going to get a clamp them down, and then this is going to be the process for each of the pieces. Drill one of the holes with a pilot drill hole so that I don't split the MDF. That's the little one right there. And then I've got another drill preset with a counter bore so the head of the screw will sink in a little bit, and then install the screw. Once I've done one, do the second one. Once installed, I unclamp it and figure out where the next ones are going to be and do them in multiple, because at that point to move. Alright, continuing on to the side panels. Now the side panels were a little bit tall to actually reach the batten to be able to clamp it, but awesomely fitted, so that worked out perfect. Once again, that back was too tall to put a clamp on properly, but the back has a port for that electrical outlet, so it fit perfectly through there and it was awesome. Alright, I wasn't too happy with how solid the sides were, so I decided that the corners needed bolstering. So I'm basically just measuring for more 1" by 1" battens so that I can glue and screw into the corners here. Alright, and these are some more supports between the left and center and the right and center panels. I'm planning on probably putting a hinge, piano hinge here, so I needed to beef this up to make sure it was strong enough. And it should be noted that these blocks had to be ground to two different angles to match the angle on the inside of those front and left, right side panels.
All right, I'm pretty happy with this look. I think it's coming along, and I can't wait, man, to get this thing going. It's looking pretty amazing. Really itching to actually start playing this thing. So we got some sanding and probably some filling to do. And the next thing up is figuring out where our buttons and joysticks and everything else is going. Maybe a little bit routing for the trackball. Yeah. I still got to figure out what the hell I'm going to do with all this space. I got to find some cool graphics to put on this. Alright, so this control panel is starting to get finalized. I took my printed templates from slagcoin.com and I laid them out in what positions I thought would look good. And some important things to think about is, do you want the joysticks going straight up towards the monitor? There's quite a lot of heated debate online about whether they should be straight up or maybe matching your angles when you're doing 2-player or 4-player cabinets. Seems to me that everybody wants to have it straight up towards the monitor. That way there's no issues with if you're at an angle and you're pushing this way, it's not exactly up. So I'm going to keep them straight, even though I kind of thought it looked a little better with it twisted to this angle. Another thing you got to keep in mind is if you've got it too close to the edge here, you've got all of your box underneath, so the sides and the braces and stuff. So what I did is I just drew them out here so that I knew exactly where that would be and I wouldn't have any issues with clearancing and hitting those underneath. And the other thing is, if we have it too close to the edge, you do want a little bit of lip here so you have your palm, especially when you're doing these lower buttons, so that I'm not hanging on the edge. I think that would be uncomfortable, so I've moved it up a little bit. And I played with the design. In my case, I just kept everything right in line with the joystick, with the center of our trackball right to the last one there from Slagcoin. And I think that looks not too bad. And then I got 1-player, 2-player select start buttons up here. I basically just laid it out. And then after I've got that figured out, I also tried to make sure that it was somewhat symmetrical. So the space between the joysticks and the ball on both sides is the same. And from the edge of the board to basically where the next piece or the button would be, because the button is on this side, and this side you're looking at the joystick. So I just tried to make sure that that side and that side there were about the same. So this is pretty much the layout, and worst case scenario, this is $8, $10 of MDF and a couple hours of my time to re-drill another one if I really don't like it. But I think this looks pretty good. Still got some nice space up here for smart work. Haven't decided whether I'm going to put the whole 6-inch trackball faceplate there or not. I might just have the trackball itself and router this area in yet. Not really sure about that yet.
Alright, lots of tippy tapping with the center punch here. Just trying to make sure I've got a nice point for the Forstner bit or spade drill bit to drill exactly where I want it. So, clamp in the top control panel, and here I am with a Forstner bit. So what I was doing here is I did try to drill through carefully and check, and it did tear out, so I was not happy with that. So what I decided to do is switch up and do a little pilot hole drill all the way through, and that way I could start going halfway through on one side and then flip it over and use that hole that I went through, the pilot hole, to locate where the drill Forstner should be for the second side. So here's where I finish up the hole from the backside so there wouldn't be any tear out. I still wasn't really happy with this method because for whatever reason it did not line up 100%. It still works. The buttons go through no problem, but when you look close, you can see that the two holes are off a little bit. It's all hidden with the button, and only I will know about it, but I still wasn't really happy with that. I think if I was to do this again, I would have a sacrificial piece of wood underneath that I'd clamp to, and I would just drill through from the top all in one go. Here I switched up to a spade drill bit just because I didn't have a 1-inch Forstner bit. And this is for the joystick hole, and it's also the same size of the insert coin, select start buttons up at the top for first player and second player. This spade drill actually worked better than the others, so note to self, use a spade drill next time. These holes are for the mounting plate for the trackball, so that the bolts can get through to the end and mount this. So I'm just taking the rubber bumpers off the bolts to check for fit, and put them back so they don't get damaged. These holes are holes in the four corners of where I need to get a jigsaw in to cut out the square for the main bulk of the trackball. Once you got the four corners, you can use the jigsaw to cut that out. Really cool tech tip about jigsaws is make sure that the blade comes to a complete stop before you try to take it out of a hole. If you don't, it's most likely going to hit on the way out and it bends the blades. So I do a cut from one side and then I stop, and then I have to back up and do the other side where I can't start right in the corner.
Alright, so this is the trackball. It's all installed right now. It's sitting up a bit with this plate, and there's a little up bit right here. Hard to see that little lip there. So there is a spacer to put that up so that this is flush. I'm not sure if I want to router this thickness down so it's flush or not. Part of me wants to leave it because this will be like a protective piece that will resist wear of people going like this. If I router it and then I put my graphic vinyl over top of it, might get rubbed off. People are using the trackball, so I haven't decided that yet. But buttons look good. Not sure which one would be red or blue or vice versa. The smaller buttons that go up here for the select start are a little bit short for the thickness here, so I need to router out about 1/8 of an inch off the back side of this, and I think I'm going to do that anyway because I did have some tear out anyway. I tried to be really careful. I think if I'd had to do this again, I would drill with a piece of sacrificial wood behind it so that wouldn't happen, but I did have a little bit, and I guaranteed 1/8 of an inch if I router that anyway. While I'm doing those ones up here, that will all clean that up and look nice anyway. So next step is getting to router the back side of these, but otherwise this is all mounted in. That looks good. So getting there. Alright, so what I'm doing here is laying out for my holes for my thread inserts, or they're called knife inserts. So basically I'm just going from the center. I kind of put this over between two tables here and hung this down so I could get the center of it. And then I traced out the outline profile of that. And then I just double checked that this was the same distance as that and that is the same as this, so that way it's centered. And then basically the whole pattern is 40 millimeters here and 80 millimeters pattern there, from that hole to that hole, and laid that out. So now I just got to center punch these and drill the hole big enough for my knife inserts.
So once again, center punching so that the drill goes exactly where I want it to. I've got one drill set up here with some tape to mark how deep I go so I don't go through the panel. And then because the inserts are square and flat on the bottom, I have another drill the same diameter, once again marked so I don't go too deep, so that I can flat bottom the hole so the insert can fit all the way down. There's the knife insert, and it's got a nice little slot in it so you can put a screwdriver tip. And then install it. Now I drilled the hole big enough so that the body of the screw would be clear. However, it still was pretty tough to put in, so I could have gone a little bit bigger. It kind of tore up a little bit at the top, so I just had to sand that down flush. But after tightening these later, these were super strong, so I'm happy with what I did.
Alright, so this is the layout for the template for my router to go in here. So what you got to do is figure out what size hole you want. So in my case, it is 6.5 inches. 6.5 inches across here both ways. And then you measure from the cutter, like that, to the edge of the base of your router base plate. And then the size you need is the size of the pocket you want, plus 2 times this dimension. And then that'll give you the dimensions for your template, which in this case is this big. And we want it a bit bigger so we can put some clamps on it and center it and everything we need to as well. So what I'm going to do now is I'm basically going to drill a couple holes in here, and then I'm going to go over to a scroll saw and cut it out. Alright, now just clean this up with a little file, make sure nice and exact, and then we can route that out.
So I got a scrap piece of wood and I laid out a target on it so that I could line up exactly where my crosshairs would go. My jig, and you can see it in action. So now that I've got it there, clean it all up, take some measurements, make sure it's exactly what I want, check the depth, and then everything seemed okay. So clean up the desk a little bit and set up the top control panel. And I had to extend the lines for the X and Y so that I could center that routering jig. And then clamp it all to the table. and router it out. Here I have set the router to about 1/8 of an inch depth, and I just made a mark about 1 inch around the buttons and just manually by eye sweep the dust out of the way and do a final pass and route it down so that way the 1 inch buttons can reach and get tightened. Similar setup on the other 1-player and 2-player buttons. Route it down 1/8 of an inch to take out all of that nasty tear out that happened, and a little bit more routing, so just a couple more passes of cleaning up with a brush to see what I was doing. But yeah, this is all hidden underneath, so I wasn't worried about doing yet more templates just to make it look perfect. If I was doing more of these, I would probably make templates for these.
All right, I couldn't resist. It took me like literally 15 minutes to get these buttons in just to take a look at what they look like. But I thought I would do this for my subscribers and give you guys an idea of what this thing's going to start looking like. So we got our red and blue button combos. I think the height of the joysticks is fine. There's definitely no clearance issues with it hitting in that hole. If it's an issue, and I do want it a little bit, I know they sell extenders for this shaft, but at this point I'm not too worried. It looks like pretty good. So you can see we've got the recess put in for our trackball, and at the same time these smaller buttons here barely had enough thread on the back, so I ended up recessing the back side with a router about 1/8 of an inch. And while I was at it, I was not happy with my tear out when I was drilling the bigger buttonholes, so I just decided to do the same with those. Not a big deal, just makes it look a little bit cleaner. And those thread inserts, there's only 2 screws in right now, but those thread inserts seem very, very strong to be able to hold these joysticks in. So overall, I am really pleased with how this is coming. All right, and then there's a final shot with the trackball installed. I've got it flush mounted now, as much as I'm going to be able to get it. I noticed on a couple sides and the corners, especially, they seem really flush. But there is a little bit of bow to the sheet metal bracket. Not that big of a deal, and I can always make the decision whether I want to put the vinyl graphics all the way up to here, or I still may even just trim it here and leave the black plate, because this powder-coated black surface is going to be something that's quite wear resistant. So, getting excited. This thing's getting closer and closer. Bam! That's another video from Way of the Wrench. I hope you enjoyed our control panel build video. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, put them down below and I will get back to you as soon as possible. Up next, we are going to take a control panel and design a stand-up arcade machine for it, using some requirements for things like how to get it through doorways, etc. And I'm going to show you guys how to use Google SketchUp a little bit. So it should be a really good video, and it's going to start looking like a real cabinet, which is really exciting. I'd also like to thank you guys at this moment, because we are now at 100 subscribers, and I can't wait to reach the next milestone, which is 1,000. Yes! All right, take it easy. See ya.